Welcome to our presentation on guest access, the good, the bad, and the WM. Welcoming also Alastair Cashen, who is going to help me out with this and explaining and talking about the solution that we have. Hey, Al, what are we here for today?
Well, hey, thanks, Darrell. We're here because we've been helping a lot of our clients with guest access, and we've been doing workshops, we've been talking to information security teams, we've been looking at how you can really implement guest access in big enterprises and what that means in Office 365. And I guess we've learned a lot. So, we wanted to put this session together to help our clients to talk about what we've learned and bring the lessons learned together on that, and then identify some of the things you really need to know about. So hopefully it will open people's eyes and give them the information they need before they start on this journey, or to make sure that they've done it right.
Excellent. Hey, thanks, Al. We'll crack into it now, and just to cover off and some initial things about what we're going to do today. We are going to look at why guest access. We'll look at some of the key lessons that we've learned on along our journey, and you'll probably relate to a number of them. There are some best practices or things that we've come across that we would make as recommendations. We'll look at some real challenges and then look at how we solved it with the WM Compliance Centre. So let's get started with that. Now, thinking of the good side of guest access, look, it is fantastic. It is a great way for us to work together with people outside of our organization. That's the key benefit. So we just want to take a brief moment really to take a look at guest access in action. We have a project manager, Darrell here, who's got a project team for an office refit, and working as a project manager, he needs to involve a architect outside of the organization. So we'll invite the architect into our team to begin to collaborate. This is Deborah. So she is a guest, and you can see all the indications there that she is a guest, and we'll add her to the team. Now we will have a look at Deborah's experience of this. Deborah gets an email inviting her to the office refit project. Let's see what that experience is like. So we're accepting that yes, this is an invite to a team, and Deborah is going to choose to look at the team within her web browser. And you can see that Deborah has a limited experience. She only sees the team. She can see a few pop-ups there about the being invited to the team and the different channels, and Deborah can go in and see some of the conversations that are going on. And she sees this one where she has been mentioned already, or the whole project has been mentioned. So just a quick reply there. Now, Darrell's back on one of the threads where there is a document that he would like Deborah to take a look at, and he's mentioned Deborah to just pull her into that conversation and understand where the document is. And back to Deborah. Deborah sees that conversation, opens up the document, and begins to take a quick look, and then starts to add some content to the document. Darrell can see, when he goes back into the document, that Deborah is adding and collaborating to that experience. So that's one of our key things. We can see Deborah there is in action on the document. We can even go to the location where she's working. So lots of powerful tools there. Now, why would we use guest access? And that's just a simple scenario, but really it does illustrate how important it is for us to work together within our environment. And that's one of the key reasons that we use guest access within Microsoft 365. We have control of the content, it is stored within our environment, and we're not seeing people going out to other tools like third-party document storage and using other communication platforms where we lose control of it. We can audit and see the where the documents are and what sort of activity is going on with our content. So let's have a look at it from an administrator point of view and some of the things that we see as things are being worked on. Now here's me in the administrator role, and I can go in and see, first of all, what kind of activity has occurred with our project brief document. So you can see Deborah has edited it. One of the really great benefits of seeing some of the activity that our guests have involved in. We can see that we've got control over the guest account, and even from the Active Directory perspective, we can go in and see when they've signed in. We can open up audit logs and see item by item some of that activity of when she's signed in. And if we want to get even further into the audit logs, we do have even details such as the IP address, and from that IP address at that particular time, Deborah was working on the file and she accessed it and made some changes. So some key benefits there around why guest access. But another thing that we want to emphasize too is that we are trying to use the tools that are available to us within the subscription that we have. We're not going out to use and buy and try and uh, use a freemium kind of approach to try and use other tools. Now, guest access, how do we implement this in a way that's going to be effective to our organization? One of the key ways that we flow through this is you do have to sit down and talk to people about requirements, see where it fits within your compliance requirements and how you might work within your organization, and really just make those choices, because that's what informs our next step there about the implementation of the security, the various settings that we're going to make. Once we've got that set, we want to let people know about how the system is going to be used, so that it's important to get across that within a good communications plan, a good adoption and change campaign. So you do need to give people training, the people running the teams, the people collaborating in the teams, and even some training for our external collaborators too, so that they feel comfortable and familiar. And when you go live, then we also have to consider how we're going to secure the teams, the sites, and various things in the background. Now, the bad, maybe the difficult. If we get into how we would traditionally think as IT pros about guest access or even any security in general, what we usually aim for is that we set a tenant-wide setting, we disable guest access, and it's about trying to enable things as an exception. So our office refit project that we just saw in the demo, we would raise that permission level so that it can allow guests to work with us. And we've basically covered all the other possibilities off by setting some tenant level settings. But how it actually works, Microsoft has designed teams and groups and this external access or guest access for collaboration. So what we actually have to do is allow guest access at that higher level so that it applies to everything. And then we have to lower the security for everything else that we don't want to have guest access for. And so this really is quite topsy-turvy in terms of how we usually think about it. Now it's not so much a problem for deployment, but when you're thinking of teams, SharePoint sites, and Yammer groups that you might already have within your organization, there's quite a complication about having to go back retrospectively and fix that. So we wanted to create something of a word cloud here, and I'm sure there's more lessons that we could add to it, but we want to draw your attention to a few of these things. That guest access defaults are set designed for sharing by default. So that's really one of the key things that we have to design for and solve for. I mentioned that we have to fix things retrospectively. So our existing teams and Yammer groups and various places that we're collaborating, we have to think about how we're going to address those. We don't want to interrupt the way that people are currently working and break their guest access as it's helping with their current projects. We do want to draw your attention also to that this is not just a technical problem. I briefly mentioned the need for training, for good communication around these changes and how we can use guest access. So it is an organizational change, and it is important to get that across with good adoption and change management. We have also learned that sensitivity labels are going to be pivotal to this solution. And it has come a long way. We will talk a bit more about that later. But we will definitely be leveraging sensitivity labels to control how guest access is allowed with our different teams and areas that we collaborate. Look, I'd sum it up by saying that there are more layers to guest access security than an onion. And really, just to get that point across, this is just a high level of some of the areas that you will have to make changes, and we'll have a look at them again closely and shortly, but you may actually end up crying as you cut this onion open and try and figure out all that you need to understand. So where does WM take you on this journey, and how can we point you in the right direction? Our key principle for how you should approach guest access is stay as close to the out-of-the-box solutions as possible. One reason for this, as Microsoft 365 is constantly changing, and as things change, you're going to need to be able to shift and pivot with that. So if you have leaned on third-party tools, they have to hurriedly make their changes, and you're paying license fees to try and cover some of these things as well. Out of the box also means, and this is really a key principle, that it's a familiar experience for your people when they are requesting these teams or when they're creating these guest access collaboration spaces. And so keeping with that familiar tool means that you're lowering barriers. You're not introducing barriers that will cause them to go to other tools and other processes and sidestep whatever you've put in place. Looking at those layers again from another point of view, remember the onion. Well, here's a better representation. We've got Active Directory that we have to consider. There's settings that we'll see soon at the Office 365 level. Key thing too is that you've got to come down even down to the service level with Microsoft Teams and with SharePoint, and then introducing sensitivity labels, which traditionally sat around documents, has expanded its capabilities to working with Teams, SharePoint, and collaboration spaces. We do have some slides going through here that I won't talk to specifically, but just to really give you a sense of the things you need to consider for each of these levels. Here's Active Directory, and even at that level, we have to make some choices around how guest access performs. Do you want guests to be able to invite other guests? Hopefully not, so we recommend turning that kind of setting off. We also think about how those invites are sent out and what kind of collaboration restrictions are there. Do we want to be able to block people from or invitations from certain domains and those sorts of things? At the organization level for Microsoft 365, sure, this is just a tick box, but yes, it is yet another layer that you have to enable. So turning on sharing within your organization, you're enabling that right there. For Microsoft 365 groups. So once you've got that ability to have sharing, come down to that next layer where all the sharing is managed at a Microsoft 365 group level. So this is about enabling those capabilities in all the services at this level too. Now looking at Teams, Microsoft Teams, this is into the Teams Admin Center and enabling guest access for Teams. And we do have it sort of grayed out there, but further down the screen, there are different choices to make around what kind of experience you want guests to have within your environment. Do you want them to be able to make private calls and share their screen or start a meet now? Then there's the SharePoint and OneDrive level. It's one thing to belong to a team and be in there to be able to collaborate, but file sharing and access to files is key too. So we have some settings that some of you might be reasonably familiar with, where you have to set the permissive level for how you want files to be shared. So key thing here is external sharing for SharePoint. We recommend that it's new and existing guests, and likewise for OneDrive. And this is actually probably the best representation of Microsoft's shared by default, where we have to start off with the most permissive, and then it's about locking things down at the individual team level. This is what we've had to design the solution for to try and solve. Now, thinking about sensitivity labels and where this comes in, it has been quite a journey seeing sensitivity labels and how they were traditionally. It used to be that it was almost just a visual signal to say, this is private, this is sensitive, and this is for internal use only. But we've seen the journey expand from just labels to controlled documents to expand out to Microsoft Teams and to collaboration spaces. So the key benefits for using the label approach is that you can standardize the way that security is applied wherever the label is applied. And that means that you can make that change at a central place and it affects wherever that label is used. It also simplifies it for our end users, the people that are using the labels themselves. Rather than them having to think about all the different layers that they might have to change security and how they share it, the label takes care of it all and it keeps it to policy. And of course, it does stamp that clear signal that it is for a certain purpose. Now, our approach with this, we realize that some of you might have started down the label journey already. And so you probably have a structure around how information is classified. Maybe you've got a label for internal or confidential or restricted. And when you're now thinking of how guest access fits into this solution, it is about creating the two labels for those scenarios, one with guest access and one without. Now, we'd realize that this could be more complex within your environment based on your requirements and the things you have to consider with compliance. But we see the simplest way is to make sure that it's really clear with a sub-label, this is for guest access and this is for just people within the organization. A quick look at sensitivity labels, and this is really something that has occurred recently, has been released recently, just GA'd. So with this label now, one of the things that we had to try and solve for was you could apply a label to a container, but what about being able to share those documents? We found sometimes that you could share a document even though the label was applied. So now Microsoft have released that control, so the label does apply the security, as you can see here, to documents. It's not able to be shared with anyone outside the organization. And we have to be quite specific. We can't send it out to people who are from Gmail or any of those public domains. So yeah, just a very new feature here, but it actually emphasizes that the space is constantly changing, so you do need to be aware of that. I did indicate too that once your guests are part of a team, that there is an experience that you have control over as an admin or even as a team owner. How do you want them to be able to collaborate within your team? So some examples of that are if you want them to be able to delete or change or update channels within the team, or how they might work with their messages if they need to go back and edit it or delete them. So these are some other considerations to think of. There are other tools available for governance, particularly around naming conventions. So do make use of those. And there is a process too, as we think about when people are members of our team and they're from outside of our organization, the recertification of membership. Does this person still need to be part of the team? Do we still need the team? And so we have to put that ownership back on the people who are closest to that work, which is the team owners, and take them through that process. So there are some tools available. We will mention them in a bit more detail later on. Something that has landed recently too, shared channels within Microsoft Teams. Space is always changing. This should simplify some of our collaboration scenarios. Just in short, it's where we have a team, and rather than inviting our guests into the whole team, we can invite them into just the channel. So it's very isolated, a great way to bring them in. And the flip side benefit is that we don't have to change back and forth between Microsoft tenants, and that's been one of those things that can draw us back out of our flow of work. So looking to see that available for external collaboration in June. Now, I'd like to be able to just hand this over to Alastair, who's going to talk about some of the gaps as we've talked about possibilities within the product. Alastair, I'll just invite you to this stage.
Thanks, Darrell. So yeah, I mean, that's great. And so I think what you saw there is what we're really recommending our customers and how to configure for guest user access. So again, just reiterating, really leaning on the sensitivity labels and the controls they provide. But when we've implemented this, and we've only just seen some of that functionality GA'd, so there have been more gaps, but the gaps are narrowing, which is great. And we are seeing so many improvements in this area all the time from Microsoft. So I think, but a couple of key things that we've been through with clients and they've called out to us that I just wanted to touch on today. So, the first is that users can change labels. So those sensitivity labels can be changed by any user. And, the issue there being it was tagged as a guest user label. So you were allowed to add guest users. You've added 10 guest users. Then someone goes in and decides they want it internal with the expectation that would remove the guest users. Well, it doesn't. They'll still be part of the team. And so, that's something you need to be aware of. Now, how can you fix that? So, the simple fix here, it's just about training and awareness. And what we have done with quite a few of our clients, and we'll talk about in the next section of the demo, is setting up a group that only users who have done the training are allowed to have access to labels that enable guest access. So you can choose which user groups have access to which labels, sensitivity labels. So you can have a group that says, I've passed training. Or, I'm trusted to do and add guests, and I've been through the training. So then only those users would have access to guest users, labels with guest user access, and so you can do awareness and training around that. So that's the sort of advanced improvement we'd recommend on that one. Now, the next is obviously, customers, they want, once you allow guests into the environment and you're allowing team owners to do that, the team owners have to take ownership, right? They have to be responsible. So off the back of that, there always becomes the concept of access reviews. So the team owners saying, hey, yep, I'm happy that these people are still have access to the team. And, you might want to do that every 6 months. Now, you can implement the out-of-the-box Azure Active Directory, access reviews. And they're great. They're improving again really quickly. You can now set them up and send them just to team owners that have groups guests available in. And but that is an advanced licensing cost, which you need to consider. And sometimes if you're just looking for that capability and the size of your organization, it can be quite cost prohibitive. So that is the simple fix. In terms of that as well, it's good, but there's limited option to customize that. It does send one email out per team. So if you've got a lot of people with 5 or 6 teams, you kind of get spammed in your email inbox and things like that. So you can, and what we've done is work through and taken those to improve that certification process. So just make it more custom and sending that out. Another sort of gap customers have seen, so guest users sit in your Active Directory forever. So basically, once they've been added, they're in there. This is one thing that's some people might not, it's not ideal because you can go in there and anytime search and find those users in the directory. So I might by mistake add Darrell, he's a guest who hasn't been active for 5 years, but add him into the team instead of you, Darrell, because he's in the directory. So the improvement you can make about that is you can look at when they were last logged in, and you can write a script pretty quickly to go through Active Directory, iterate those guest users and check last login date, and then remove them after 6 months. Send an email if you require, but that is a good way to do that. And then I think we've talked about this a little bit already, but just to reiterate, you come up and you go the new settings of what you want to make your environment secure for guest access. And a lot of that will be about sensitivity labels, but it's how do you then get those retrospectively applied? If it's a greenfield deployment of Teams or something and you haven't used it yet, it's pretty easy. You set up the rules and you use them. The hard part is going back and applying it to the 1,000 or 10,000 teams you already have. How do you get them to be compliant with this new policy? Because if you're turning on guest access for the first time and they don't have sensitivity labels set, they will be able to add guest access, etc. So you need to work with that, understand it. It's also highly relevant when you've got different services with different requirements. So your teams, you might want to have that enabled, but actually you don't want people inviting guests to SharePoint sites, or vice versa. And so the simple fix there, it's just a big engagement piece. It's going out and understanding it, or it's making some reasonably hard decisions that we're just locking everything down. Then the advanced improvement in a lot of what we've done is just automate that. So you'll see what we see in the Compliance Center next, and how you can automate that using Flow and bots to help chase users and remind them and get that all done and pull the environment into compliance. So those are the gaps. Cool. So how do WM fill these gaps? Now, we've been through this process a lot with our clients, and obviously the sort of same challenges come up. And so we have obviously pulled this together, and we don't want to invent the wheel every time we start a project. So we've put together something we call the WM Compliance Center. So what is the WM Compliance Center? Well, it's actually quite simple. And what we do is we've built a solution that builds on all of the recommendations we've said. So we want to be using M365 to its full capability for the security and controls. And we just want to fill the small gaps that are left. And they are very, very small. So we want to give improved visibility around our environment and what state of compliance it's in. And then we need it to be super flexible because, no client's the same, right? There's different requirements. They're using Office 365 in such different ways. It needs to be really quick to change and easy to fill in custom requirements. So that's what we pulled together. The actual technical solution behind it is pretty simple. So, the first version of this only took us around 30 days to pull together. We've made lots of improvements over the time, and it's pretty cool now, if I say so myself. But the simplicity of it is what's great. So we're only using the tools that are in your M365 environment. We have some automation scripts, about 3 or 4, that run through and pull all the key information around all of your teams, SharePoint sites, Yammer groups, anything that's an Office 365 group. Pulls all the key information around those. Who are the owners? When was it last used? What's the security label? And it puts it into one big list in the Yammer Compliance Center. And then that gives us full visibility. We do reporting off that. Then we trigger automations and workflows using Power Automate or Logic apps, depending on the size and scale and what we're doing. And we use that to inform people to close those gaps. And specifically with guest user access, we're going to see the demo through how we do that. But it is a bit more than just guest user access in this. We use it for, the access reviews. We use it for archiving for a lot of our clients. Cool. So let's do a quick demo. Perfect. So this is the WM Compliance Center. This is deployed into your M365 environment. It's just some quick scripts. The deployment takes about 45 minutes, and it puts in this site. It puts in all of the Azure automation scripts that read the information, and you approve the API permissions. But we hand over all the code, so it's in your environment, and so you have full ownership of that, which we think is important because this reads all of the teams and groups and all of your important information. So you need to have complete ownership of that. But as I said, it's the simplicity of the solution is key. And what it's doing is it's pulling in. So we can see here in our demo environment here that we have 2,522 teams, groups, and Yammer groups in the environment, and we can see what status these are in. So really quickly, you can see here, I've got a team here, which we're going to show the demo on. Some of these are in compliance, and some of them are not. Now, for us in this demo environment, compliance means that the team has 2 owners. It means that it has a sensitivity label, and it means that that sensitivity label is appropriate. So if you have standard with no guests, as in here, you're not allowed any guests, otherwise it's not compliant. If you are allowed guests, obviously you can have guests. So you'll see this one here is compliant, but the others aren't. Now, all this data, the first thing we ever do with clients is install this and just get an understanding of the estate, because a lot of the times people don't quite know where they're at. We're not sure if this is a big problem, a little problem, and you can actually do this, and some customers are in a really good place. They've actually had processes, and they look at it and go, actually, there's only a handful of sites that we need to go and remediate. We can just go and do that. And it gives you that visibility. So we also then obviously can pull that into a dashboard. So depending on the actual compliance requirements in the organization, we then change these metrics. But some of our sample metrics that we use, so we can see here in the environment of 2,500 teams, 97 of them have guest users, 72 have less than 2 owners, not too bad, but a lot of them have not had any activity in the last 2 years. So, most of them, but it is a demo test environment, so that's kind of understandable. And you can see even worse is the metric 4, where only 100 of the teams have sensitivity labels apply. So that's obviously, not probably that crazy a starting point for some clients as well, because sensitivity labels are so new, they haven't been implemented yet, and as they are, that key part of control, knowing what it is. But then we can pull out whatever's relevant to the customer, so we can see which teams in this demo environment have the most guest users. So we can see that the transport community has quite a few, so it's got 21 guests. We can see which departments have the most guests, just to see if there's any anomalies there, and then we can look at that. So, great dashboard to give you that overview. And that is the core part of it in terms of that understanding your environment and what's in it. Now, if you are in the Office 365 place, you're probably very familiar with Power Automate and Flow or Logic apps, depending on which makes sense. And once this data is here, we have all this data and we can run some amazingly powerful workflows really quickly. So you'll see here on we can look at any one of these. We can go and search by owners what these are, but we pull in all the data that you need to run really useful workflows around your governance and compliance. So key team, internal party organization, but we have the GUIDs of the IDs, we have sensitivity labels, visibility, we have the members, we have the list, listed out who those members are. There's some restrictions. If there's more than, I think, 100 members, we don't put them all in here. We put them in a free text field. Lots of stuff we've learned over time. We have the site collection administrators and who those emails are, and et cetera, et cetera. So you can look at those and see if they've changed. One thing we had with a client was that people were adding themselves into adding other team members into the site collection admins of teams to get around what they were looking at. So you'd have the group security all perfect, but someone had added into site collection admins. And so these are the things we can look at and check. We also pull through the usage information. So how many posts, files, the storage, all of these sort of things. So, you can talk to people, say, hey, your community's not been used recently, and go from there. So cool. So that gives you the overview of this. Now, what does it really look like, and what are some of the things you can do when it comes to guest user access? So let's have a look at a video of what that looks like from an end user perspective, and just talk through that and how we'd set that up. So with these out of the box settings we're recommending, and then with the compliance center, what it means. So here we go. I'm a user. I've never done any training on guest user access, and I come in and I see that the only sensitivity label is one that doesn't allow guests. So I create my team private, and I am going to give that a team name. Cool. So as we create this team, that will get provisioned out. Now, it's provisioned. Our solution is looking for any teams that are created at any time, team, Yammer group, or anything. And it's going to go and show up in the compliance center within less than 5 minutes. So maximum is 5 minutes, and you can see there we couldn't add guests. So that's created. So I can then start using that as I'd like. I can see that it's got no guests, and what I'll do is we'll see this pop up here. So marketing collaboration just popped into the compliance center, and that's triggered a flow. So that flow is going to reach out to the owner that's identified, and it's going to ask them to come in and classify. So, we're going to classify that team. We're going to check and make sure that we've got all the information we need to govern it correctly. But we're going to do it after it's created. So again, back to that ethos of keeping things out of the box. We're not putting barriers in front of people's requests. So we'll come back in here, and you see on the left, I've got a notification in my chat. So I'll go have a look at this. Would have just popped up on the Discord. So there we can see that we've got a message from Flow. Now, we've used Flowbot in this demo. For some clients, we've actually branded this into an Office 365 management bot, but you can use Flowbot or whatever. And we've sent an adaptive card for the user to then go and classify their team. So you'll see here, it's finance and it's social. But we also have, in this use case, we've asked if people want to enable guest user access. So we know that that team's not, so they can then request it. In the background, we then check, and so we've checked this user hasn't completed the teams and guest user access, so they need to do their 3-minute training to go through. And we would then connect this to the LMS of your choice, or otherwise we find quite useful is just using forms as a really simple tracking of training and compliance. So there you go, that user's jumped through, watched a video, taken some questions, and completed their guest user training. And now what we've done in the background is given that user access to the sensitivity label to be able to go and tag their team. Now, the API to do this automatically is just coming into general availability, so we can update the sensitivity label for them. But what we've been doing so far is just sending them a little video that shows them how to apply the sensitivity label. It's part of that training they've just done, so they actually know they can go in here. So here, the users come into the team, and they can see and just update this team and change it into having guest user access. So now we know that this user has done the training. They have, they understand the implications of adding guests. They can now change their sensitivity label because they have access to that label. And they can now go and add guests to the team as they want. So you'll see here, we're now going to go in and edit the team. We're going to add a guest, which is exciting. And, we've also would have sent them a message saying, hey, by the way, would you mind adding another owner to the team? Because we want to have 2 owners per team, just in case one of you leaves the organization, there's always a single point of contact. So we've added my external account as a guest. And what we'll also do is promote Chris into an owner. And what would happen is this has triggered a change. So the compliance center would see this, and within 5 minutes, it would update. And you'll see here that already it's got the finance and social tags under the department columns. And as those changes come in, it's going to update really quickly. to show that it's gone compliant. It's a really useful tool. It's something we help deploy with clients for half a dozen days, and get some great results in pulling all of this out of the box together and filling those gaps that you might have come across yourselves or you might need to solve. Perfect.
As another way of wrapping it up too, you saw in action the solution that we've put together. And so if we cast our mind back to setting those standards of how we expect guest access to work, we can apply that setting and apply it as an exception too. And one of the powerful things around using this approach with labels is that we can assign that label to a group of people, we can assign it to a department, or also for particular areas within the business as well. So lots of control there within the guest access. So that does conclude our presentation of guest access within Microsoft Teams and within the environment of Microsoft 365. Look, thank you very much for attending, and do send us through your questions, engage with us on the various different social channels, and do reach out to your WM Apply person to find out more about the Compliance Centre. Thank you.